Why did the Mongol cavalry strike fear into Europeans? The iron hooves of the Mongol Empire once swept across half of Europe, even bringing the entire Russian region into its territory. Even the strongest fighting forces in Europe at the time, the Teutonic Knights and the Crusaders, suffered consecutive defeats, unable to halt the Mongol advance westward. Yet the Mongol campaigns did not end because of defeat, but rather due to an unexpected event that forced them to return east. The reason the Mongols could devastate Europe was largely because they were not a traditional state in the conventional sense. They were more like a flexible and unpredictable raiding force. On the battlefield of that era, they seemed like an unsolvable existence. This campaign was the second Western expedition in Mongol history, and at the same time a continuation of internal struggles for power within the Mongol Empire. Through this war, the four grandsons of Genghis Khan secretly staged a contest for the throne. In 1227, Genghis Khan died at the age of 66. Afterward, his third son Ögedei inherited the position of Great Khan as the successor of the Mongol Empire. Ögedei did not continue his father's governing philosophy, but instead revealed his extravagant and wasteful nature. He quickly squandered most of the wealth plundered during Genghis Khan's first Western expedition. Facing a shortage of resources, Ögedei's solution was to launch further wars, replenishing supplies through plunder. Thus, the second Western expedition began. The logic of succession among the Mongols was completely different from that of the Central Plains civilization. In the Central Plains, the throne was usually inherited according to the traditional system of passing it to the eldest legitimate son. Like the son of a landlord, no matter what the son was like, the estate and vast bureaucratic system would naturally pass on to him. However, on the Mongolian steppe, wealth and power were sustained primarily through war and plunder. Only the strong could obtain the right of succession. Therefore, the Mongol succession system emphasized military merit rather than bloodline. Under this logic, anyone who wished to inherit the throne had to prove his strength through war. Thus, the conquest of Europe became an opportunity for these Mongol nobles to fight for power. The leading figures of this expedition were the four grandsons of Genghis Khan: Batu, son of the eldest son Jochi; Baidar, son of the second son Chagatai; Guyuk, eldest son of Ögedei; and Monka, eldest son of Tolui. To ensure victory in this power struggle, the legendary general Subutai, who had served during Genghis Khan's time, personally led them on the campaign. The apparent goal of this war was the conquest of Europe, but in reality it was to provide these young Mongol princes with a stage to compete for the throne. Europe was merely the battlefield where they could enhance their military achievements. In the autumn of 1236, tens of thousands of Mongol troops arrived in the Volga River region. They forcibly captured Han artisans to build bridges for crossing rivers and easily took the city of Bulgar. The descendants of Genghis Khan continued to demonstrate great power. The third-generation imperial grandsons each commanded their own forces and advanced separately, burning, looting, and killing along the way, as if engaging in a brutal hunting competition. The Mongol strategy could hardly be called anything but sinister. They assembled at the Principality of Volga, Bulgaria, and put forward harsh terms, demanding annual tribute. Otherwise, the city would face massacre, essentially extorting protection fees. Yet the rulers of Volga, Bulgaria refused to submit, and as a result, one day later the Mongol army achieved a crushing victory. All the princes of Volga, Bulgaria died on the battlefield, showing that refusal to pay tribute meant annihilation. The iron cavalry of the Mongols then turned toward the Russian lands, targeting the Principality of Vladimir. Facing the threat, the Grand Prince of Vladimir also refused to pay tribute. Thus, Batu Khan was the first to capture Moscow. Immediately after, another prince, Monka, unwilling to fall behind, led his troops directly against the city of Vladimir. It is worth noting that Monke was the son of Tolui, who was the sworn brother of Guojing in the novel Legend of the Condor Heroes. He was extremely cunning, forcing Rus captives to march at the front as human shields. In only 4 days, he seized the city of Vladimir. In the chaos, the Grand Prince of Vladimir fled to other principalities to seek reinforcements and eventually organized a Russian coalition to prepare for a decisive battle with the Mongols on the banks of the Sit River. The 61-year-old veteran Subutai led the main army in a forced march overnight. At dawn, the Mongol cavalry launched a surprise attack on the coalition's camp. Once again, the Mongol army achieved victory. From that point, they began their conquest of Kievan Rus' and Belarus. The rule over the region of Ukraine lasted for 2 centuries. For those countries willing to pay tribute, what was the situation? At Azov, facing the threat of the Mongol army, the people of Azov chose to surrender and open their city. The Mongols declared that as long as taxes were paid on time, the state could still be managed by its own rulers. Such a strategy was clearly far more effective than forced conquest. In 1239, the Mongol army captured the birthplace of the Rus' region, Kiev. Batu Khan appointed Yaroslav II as Grand Prince of Kiev, making him the Mongol representative in the area. The descendants of Yaroslav eventually established the Principality of Moscow, which grew stronger with Mongol support, gradually developing into what later became Russia. However, the Mongols' next target faced fierce resistance. In 1241, the Mongol army advanced into Poland. The King of Poland fled in panic, but Poland's vassal state, Silesia, produced a hard-headed leader, Duke Henry II of Silesia. He gathered 80,000 allied troops to fight the Mongols to the death. This coalition was unevenly equipped, with some wearing fine armor and others fighting bare-chested. Among them were German infantry, Teutonic knights, even miners, workers, and many townspeople. On April 9, 1241, Duke Henry and his nobles prayed at dawn. Townspeople tearfully kissed their wives and children goodbye, bravely marching out of the city to face the enemy. The Mongols once again used their familiar dogfight tactic, feigning retreat to lure enemy knights into an ambush. Once the elite knights were annihilated, the infantry became helpless prey in Mongol eyes. Courage meant nothing against the sharp swords of the Mongols. Compared to the European coalition's frontal confrontation, Mongol tactics were clearly more flexible and varied. This battle became a pivotal one in the Mongols' second Western expedition. The Mongol army then turned toward Czech lands and Austria and gathered in Hungary. King Bela IV of Hungary, realizing the threat, immediately sent envoys with swords to plead for aid from Western European countries, but no one responded. Bela had to lead 100,000 Hungarian troops alone to resist the Mongols by the Danube River. In this battle, the Mongols slaughtered 70,000 Hungarian soldiers, their arrows painting the Danube River red. The Holy Roman Empire finally felt the Mongol threat, requesting help from England and France while strengthening city walls. Yet unexpected events arose. News arrived from the capital. Great Khan Ogedei was gravely ill. Do not forget, this Western campaign was called the Eldest Sons Campaign. Princes eligible for succession were all in this army. Prince Monka and Prince Guyuk immediately returned to the capital. Batu Khan reacted more slowly. Halfway back, he heard the Empress plan to support Guyuk as heir. Batu simply decided not to return, proclaiming himself king on the banks of the Volga River and establishing the Golden Horde. Have you heard of such a country? For 200 years they neither farmed, nor produced, nor traded. Their only means of subsistence was assassination. More chilling still, this was not fiction, but the real existence of more than 700 years ago, the Nizari sect, assassins. They lived by assassination, striking terror into countless kings and emperors. Yet this nation of assassins, feared by countless powerful rulers, was ultimately crushed completely by Mongol cavalry. The one behind this end was Genghis Khan's grandson, Mongke. How terrifying was the Nizari sect, assassins? Imagine you are a French count, one day traveling near the mountains of Dalam, Alborz Mountains. Suddenly, a mysterious castle appears on the mountaintop. Before you can understand what is happening, several men in white robes invite you inside. Entering the castle, you feel a chill penetrating your bones. Everyone inside wears pure white robes, except the master of the castle, dressed in black. He smiles and says, "Let me show you a performance." With a wave of his hand, several white-robed servants leap from a high tower, shattering into 8 pieces on the spot. Then the master proudly says, "This performance is called loyalty. I still have 60,000 such martyrs. You think this is terrifying enough? But what if you were the prince of a neighboring country? One morning, you wake, intending to embrace your beloved consort, only to find a gleaming dagger stuck into the pillow beside you. You bolt upright and scan the room, finding the outside guards behaving as usual, and at that moment someone stands in the corner of the chamber, showing half a face, and coldly says that if you do not pay tribute to the Nizari sect, assassins, next time that dagger will pierce your throat. After saying this, the person does not flee, but instead walks toward death with a smile. It is said that the former ruler Saladin was forced to retreat because of a similar threat. So how did the Nizari sect, assassins, cultivate these terrifying, heart-stopping killers? The credit goes to their unique Paradise Experience course. Nizari children began harsh combat training from a young age, and their leader Rukn al-Din Khushar promised that if they worked hard enough they could go to paradise. You might think this was an empty promise, but no, they really gave the children a paradise. Rukn al-Din Khushar built a so-called paradise for these assassins, with endless wine, food, and beautiful women. As the young assassins neared adulthood, Rukn al-Din Khushar ordered them drugged and taken into this paradise. When they awoke, they saw with their own eyes that paradise truly existed. After they became accustomed to that life of pleasure, Rukn al-Din Khushar drugged them again and took them out, then told them that the only way to return to paradise was to die while carrying out an assassination. Therefore, these assassins executed their missions without fear of life or death because they believed death was a shortcut to paradise. For these killers, living was actually a shame. How desperate the people of the West must have been then. Not only did they have to guard constantly against the Damoclean sword hanging over their heads, but they also had to be wary of the god-side Mongol iron cavalry that could arrive at any moment. Yet no one expected that this state, famed for terrorism and assassination, would eventually meet its nemesis, the Eastern Mongol Cavalry, which finally ended its reign of terror. In 1251, the Nizari leader Rukn al-Din Khushar stared at the world map, pondering his next extortion target. He eventually fixed his sights on the most powerful man in the world, the great Khan of the Mongols, Mongol. That choice, however, marked the beginning of the Nizari sect's destruction. At that time, Mongol was also studying the world map, thinking about the direction of his future campaigns. His grandfather Genghis Khan's and his uncle Ogedai's 2 western expeditions had both been very successful, placing considerable pressure on him. Facing the westward target Egypt and the southward target the southern Song, Mongol hesitated about which side to attack first, when suddenly a report from the guards arrived. An assassin from the west had come bearing an order from the Nizari leader Rukn al-Din Khushar, demanding that Mongol pay annual tribute or face punishment from the assassin dynasty. Mongol was momentarily taken aback. Wasn't that his usual threat line? He had been worrying about which direction to attack, and yet the assassin effectively presented the decision for him. As a result, Mongol did not hesitate to dispatch 2 armies, one, led by his younger brother Kublai, to the south to attack the southern Song, and the other, led by his other brother Hulagu, to the west to confront the Nizari sect, assassins. Thus, the Mongol Empire's 3rd western expedition began. In June 1256, Hulagu led a vast Mongol army into Nizari territory. Wherever the army went, it cut through resistance like slicing melon, unstoppable. Why were the Nizari forces so easily defeated? The reason is simple. The assassins excelled at single operator killings, while the Mongol army specialized in strong team coordination and large-scale warfare. Although the assassins were superb at individual murder, facing a regular army like the Mongols that emphasized formations and firepower suppression, their daggers were nearly useless against curved swords and volleys of arrows. Soon, the Mongol army approached the Nizari stronghold of Alamut. The fortress sat atop sheer cliffs, with only a winding path leading to its entrance. The terrain was so precipitous that even experienced climbers reportedly struggled to scale it. Yet the Mongols' routine remained unchanged. Surrender and you live, pay protection fees on time, and everyone is left in peace. If you choose to resist, your only fate is massacre. Those who had seen the Mongols' previous 2 campaigns knew well that under such threats, most states would long since have chosen surrender. However, how could the Nizari sect, assassins, be treated as an ordinary state? Rukn al-Din Kershah himself had thoughts of surrender, but the assassins he had trained refused to give up. They told Rukn al-Din Kershah, "Leader, you cannot surrender. Have you not always said that to die in battle is to enter paradise? We will save you a place in heaven. Let us all go together." Thus, a tragic drama began. In November 1256, Rukn al-Din Kershah was forced to confront the Mongol army at the Eagle's Nest fortress, Alamut. After 2 previous Western campaigns, the Mongol army had already captured countless craftsmen from various countries, greatly strengthening their power and decisively transforming into a technological force. Hulagu deployed Hui trebuchets and unleashed a furious bombardment on the fortress. The stronghold collapsed under the fire, and what followed was a merciless massacre. Hulagu ordered war horses to trample Rukn al-Din Kershah to death. The once feared dynasty of assassins was completely annihilated. The destruction of the Nizari sect, assassins, greatly excited surrounding states. They clapped their hands in joy, thinking they no longer had to fear assassination. Yet this joy did not last long, for Hulagu's Mongol army had no intention of stopping. They resolved to march further west, setting their sights on Egypt. In 1257, Hulagu led the Mongol army to attack Baghdad, capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. Baghdad had once been praised as one of the greatest cities in the world, renowned alongside Chang'an. Yet under Mongol assault, Caliph al-Mustasim, seeing that the situation was hopeless, decisively chose to surrender the city. After Baghdad was taken, the so-called greatest library of the Middle Ages, the House of Wisdom, was completely destroyed. Countless precious manuscripts were thrown into the river by the Mongols. What is striking is that after the fall of the city, Hulagu looked upon the caliph's vast treasury filled with innumerable treasures and was puzzled. Can storing all this wealth fill your stomach? If you had used it to strengthen your army, would you have ended up like this? Al-Mustasim replied helplessly, "I could not bear to." Hulagu then ordered him locked inside with his treasure, as a grim lesson that money is not omnipotent. As the Mongol army pressed on, history was being rewritten. Africa grew closer. The Mongols marched quickly into Syria and within 7 days captured Aleppo of the Ayyubid dynasty. Hulagu was overjoyed. Now he stood separated from ancient Egypt by only a desert, and the capital Cairo drew ever nearer. Yet just as Hulagu prepared to launch an even greater offensive, news arrived from the distant east. One of the greatest conquerors in history, Mongke, had unexpectedly died in an obscure little town. Later scholars would call this town Diaoyucheng, Hechuan, or Diaoyucheng, Hechuan. The news struck like a thunderbolt, abruptly altering the rhythm of the Mongol advance. Hulagu immediately turned back. So what made the Mongol army so powerful? It was not only their cavalry tactics, the advantage of their bows, or their rapid mobility. Behind Mongol success lay deeper political and strategic reasons. First, the period of Mongol rise coincided with a time of upheaval across the world. Internal strife was the main theme, whether in Russia, Poland, the Arab states, the Jin dynasty, or Khwarezm, all were mired in endless civil wars. Nations consumed their strength in internal divisions, unable to mount united resistance, thus paving the way for Mongol conquest. In contrast, the Mongol Empire resembled more a war machine than a traditional state. Its core mission was clear: conquest and plunder. They lacked a complex administrative system, and fiscal revenue depended mainly on spoils of war. Their political mechanism was brutally simple. After conquering a city, if its people resisted, they were slaughtered. If they obeyed, they were allowed self-rule but had to pay protection fees on time. This model was not only less labor-intensive, but highly efficient. The strength of the Mongols also lay in their willingness to devote the entirety of national power to war. They were unbound by restraints of governance and unconcerned with the long-term administration of their realm. For them, war was not only a means of expansion, but also a continuous source of revenue. Through war, they obtained wealth, resources, and technological support. In particular, their unique system of feeding war with war meant that the Mongol army not only secured provisions and supplies through conquest, but also expanded their ranks with captives. The Mongol military used the 1,000 household system, forcing captured soldiers from defeated states into their own army, often as the vanguard. The Mongols employed captives as human shields, driving them to charge at the front lines. He himself served as the blocking detachment to supervise the battle, and this approach both reduced his own casualties and maximized the conversion of enemy resources to his own use. If a Qianhu performed well, he could even be promoted to official rank and granted land, and this incentive mechanism made them eager to serve. In addition, the Mongols' emphasis on technology and artisans greatly enhanced their combat power. Through continual conquest, the Mongols captured large numbers of craftsmen from various regions, including present-day Western Xia, the Song, and Muslim areas, and these artisans brought advanced techniques that helped the Mongol army forge powerful siege engines such as the Hui trebuchet. This giant engineering weapon, capable of hurling 150 kilograms of stone, made the Mongol army invincible in siege warfare. Overall, Mongol success depended not only on military skill, but even more on highly efficient political strategy and flexible forms of combat organization. Yi Jian named Cheng. Just how powerful was Genghis Khan? The territory of his Mongol Empire once occupied 1/5 of the globe. On the eastern border, the moon had already risen among the branches, while on the western holdings, the blazing sun was only just at its zenith. His lands stretched across thousands of li. Yet, how did he rise from a penniless youth to a steppe overlord who made the world tremble? Behind all of this stood the aid of a mysterious elder. Genghis Khan's birth was unusual. It is said that when he was born, he clenched a clot of blood in his fist, which according to Mongol tradition signified that he would wield the power over life and death. At that time, the Mongols had a custom of inviting a sage to foretell a newborn's future, but the sage for Genghis Khan came of his own accord. Qing histories record that this elder spared no effort to cross layer after layer of mountains just to see Genghis Khan once, and he prophesied that the child would accomplish great deeds. Even more wondrous, several of the crucial personal turning points in Genghis Khan's later life were closely tied to this elder. The Mongols also had a unique tradition. If, at the time a baby was born, the tribe happened to capture an enemy warrior, then the warrior's courage would be transmitted to the newborn. By coincidence, on the day Temujin was born, his father captured the Tatar chieftain Temujin Uj, and so Genghis Khan received the name Temujin. Yet Temujin's life was not fortunate. He was perhaps history's most ill-fated official's son. At age 9, his father was poisoned, and the murderer was precisely the son of the Tatar chieftain Temujin, Uga from those years. From then on, Temujin's feud with the Tatar tribe was set, and the enmity had only just begun. Under the harsh laws of the steppe, after his father's death, Temujin's tribe chose a new leader, and even his uncles attempted to divide up the family property. According to the customary practice of the time Zongdiji, the uncle was supposed to take his mother in marriage, yet these relatives not only failed to care for the family, but seized whatever could be seized, and finally drove the mother and children out of the tribe. For nomadic peoples, expulsion from the tribe was almost equivalent to a death sentence, as the Mongol saying put it, like deep water dried up, when congealed it is already shattered. Yet in the midst of this despair, Temujin's family still adopted an orphan named Bo-Hu, who later became one of the 10 founding merit lords of the Mongol Empire. Just when Temujin fell into dire straits, the mysterious elder appeared again and took him to Mount Burkhan Khaldun. There, the elder not only taught Temujin to hunt, but also taught him to grasp the spirit of nature, especially reverence for the Great Mountain. This mountain became the spiritual pillar of Temujin's life. Whenever Temujin encountered difficulties, he would go alone to Burkhan Khaldun, the mountain he regarded as sacred, and seclude himself for 3 days. For him, this mountain always brought enlightenment, but for his enemies, whenever Temujin returned to the mountain, disaster would soon follow. Temujin's rise began with an accident. He could have chosen to live out his days peacefully on the steppe, enjoying a quiet life with wife and children, but fate did not intend to let him pass his years so simply. The Merkit tribe abducted his wife. On the steppe at that time, this was a common custom. Having one's wife taken was not rare, and replacing her with a new one was even the norm. But Temujin was no ordinary man. He could not tolerate such humiliation. After his wife was seized, Temujin did not rush to seek revenge, but instead chose to enter the sacred mountain alone and remain in seclusion for 3 days. After coming down from the mountain, he resolved to reclaim everything he had lost. First, he needed allies. He brought with him Bo-Orchu, who had grown up with him since childhood, and gathered more than 200 neighbors from the surrounding areas. On the Mongolian steppe, people had no fixed dwelling places, camping here today and perhaps moving elsewhere tomorrow. Thus, many neighbors could be found to lend a hand. At this crucial moment, the mysterious old man appeared once again. This time, he not only gave Temujin spiritual support, but also sent another mighty warrior, his own son Gelmi. The old man told Temujin that Gelmi had been sent by eternal heaven itself to assist him. It was destiny. Gelmi later became one of the founding generals of the Mongol Empire. From then on, Temujin had gained a loyal comrade in arms. However, Temujin's band of just over 200 men clearly could not rely on their strength alone to conquer a tribe. At this time, the Mongol tradition of sworn brotherhood Anda played an important role. If you are familiar with heroic tales of the steppes, you must know the word Anda. It meant sworn brotherhood, and in the eyes of the Mongols, the bond of Anda surpassed even blood ties, closer than one's own kin. Temujin first sought out his father's sworn brother, Wang Khan, leader of the Karaite tribe. At that time, Wang Khan was already one of the most powerful leaders of the central steppe. Yet this was still not enough to give Temujin confidence. He then turned to his own sworn brother, Jamuka, who was the leader of the Jadaran tribe. Facing his sworn brother's request, and with the appeal of Wang Khan, Jamuka readily agreed to send troops in support. The three forces combined, Temujin was about to launch the first war of his life. Though nominally a three-way coalition, Wang Khan and Jamuka were more like symbolic supporters. The true main force was Temujin himself. His first campaign was a resounding victory. Not only did he successfully reclaim his wife, but he also obtained abundant spoils of war. Yet the joy of victory did not last long. When dividing the spoils, both Wang Khan and Jamuka felt neglected. Though no quarrel broke out openly, the seeds of discontent were planted in their hearts. Not long after, conflicts resurfaced. When Temujin accepted Jamuka's enthusiastic invitation and led his small group to join Jamuka's tribe, new problems arose. In Mongol culture, there existed the concept of white bones and black bones. This was not only a matter of lineage division, but also determined one's status and treatment in society. White bones referred to direct descendants, while black bones referred to those not of direct descent. Between them, there was not only a distinction of noble and lowly blood, but also vast differences in living conditions. The kinship between Temujin and Jamuka could be traced back to the same grandmother, but their grandfathers were not the same. Jamuka's grandfather was this grandmother's first husband, so Jamuka belonged to the white bones. Temujin's grandfather was her second husband. Thus, Temujin was categorized as black bones. This difference in lineage made Jamuka always believe his own status was higher than Temujin's. He often publicly boasted of his noble bloodline to enhance his prestige and deliberately belittled Temujin. Jamuka was adept at using this cultural divide for psychological manipulation. He placed himself in a position above Temujin, gradually regarding him as a subordinate or follower rather than a true equal brother. Yet Temujin never felt inferior because of his humble birth. In his view, differences between people did not lie in lineage, but in ability and character. Regardless of origin or tribal background, Temujin was always willing to employ talented individuals, treating them as brothers. This policy of appointing people without regard to tribe or even former enmity became an important cornerstone in the later founding of the Mongol Empire. A fundamental principle of Mongol culture was respect for the strong. Temujin's rise was the best embodiment of this idea. As he gradually displayed extraordinary leadership, more and more tribes chose to stand by his side. Even his father's former followers slowly returned to him. Temujin realized he was destined to soar on a broader stage, not to remain under the shelter of others. In the end, Temujin decided to leave Jamuka and establish his own independent tribe. Former allies became eternal enemies. In the years that followed, the actions of Jamuka and Wang Khan would, step by step, inadvertently push Temujin onto the path of becoming the great Khan of the Mongols. On Temujin's road to power, the presence of the Tatar tribe loomed large. There was no doubt it was a boulder he had to cross. To understand the role of the Tatar tribe, one must first grasp the historical background of the time. Long before Temujin, the various Mongol tribes and the Jurchen tribes had all been vassals of Liao. Liao was a regime established by the Khitan people. If you have seen demi, gods, and semi-devils, you will have some sense of the Khitan presence, and Qiao Feng is a typical Khitan figure. Liao in those days oppressed and exploited the Mongols, the Jurchen, and other tribes. In the end, however, Wanya Naguda among the Jurchen rose in rebellion, overthrew Liao, and established Jin. The rise of Jin completely changed the steppe situation, and the Mongol tribes also became vassals of Jin. Yet Jin's ambitions did not end there. After toppling Liao, Jin originally planned to extinguish the Southern Song in passing, but to their surprise, in the supposedly weak Southern Song, there suddenly emerged a superlative leading man, Yue Fei. Yue Fei's campaign of tempering steel against Jin, to a certain extent, tied down Jin's strength and granted the Mongol tribes a precious breathing space. During this period, the Mongol tribes gradually grew stronger. But the nomadic civilization of the steppe faced a long-standing problem. It was difficult to form a unified, powerful empire. Unlike the agrarian civilization of the Central Plains, where land is fixed and immovable, Yamen in the Central Plains can levy taxes, protect the people, conscript soldiers, and even provide disaster relief. On the steppe, however, production is based on herding and livestock move, so nomads often organize as small tribes. On the steppe, royal authority has limited effect. Unless under pressure from a strong external enemy, it is difficult for the small tribes to unite spontaneously. When strong outside threats arise, however, the steppe tribes will, for the sake of a common enemy, temporarily unite and form a powerful alliance. Jin understood this point very well. Once the Mongol tribes were unified, they would pose a tremendous threat to Jin. For this reason, Jin adopted a strategy of dividing the Mongol tribes and suborned one of the strongest tribes of the day, the Tatar tribe. The Tatar tribe became Jin's agent, suppressing the unification process of the other Mongol tribes. Under an astoundingly harsh rule, the Mongol tribes had long been hoping for a ruthless leader to take them in toppling Jin's domination, and that leader was undoubtedly Temujin. But he first had to deal with the Tatar tribe, and do not forget that the two sides were hereditary enemies. At that time, Temujin and his former ally Jamuka had already broken completely. The Tatars seized the opportunity and joined with Jamuka, attempting to confront Temujin together. Behind this, Jin had always felt threatened by the development of the various Mongol tribes and explicitly forbade alliances among the Mongol tribes. Therefore, the union of the Tatars with Jamuka was an open defiance of Jin's orders. Temujin seized on this situation and decided to use the alliance to exert greater pressure on the Tatars. He sent men disguised as Tatar tribesmen to raid the Jin frontier. When Jin learned of the news, it immediately concluded that the Tatars had utterly betrayed them and sent envoys to the Tatar tribe demanding an explanation. The Tatar chieftain felt grossly wronged, but when Jin required him to go in person to explain, he feared he would not return alive and refused to go. Jin took this stance as proof of Tatar rebellion already as good as nailed down, so it decided to call upon the Mongol tribes to send troops together to punish the Tatars. Temujin, keenly grasping the opportunity, was the first to respond to the call and joined with his ally Wang Khan, Togrul, to coordinate with Jin in attacking the Tatars. In the end, the Tatar tribe suffered a disastrous defeat. Temujin's power grew greatly, and his ally Wang Khan, Togrul, began to feel extremely uneasy about Temujin's rise. In 1203, Wang Khan, Togrul, felt extremely threatened by Temujin's strength, and the two sides fought. Temujin skillfully employed cavalry to launch a night assault on Wang Khan, Togrul's palisaded camp, utterly smashing him and successfully annexing Wang Khan, Togrul's tribe. By 1204, Temujin had conquered all the tribes on the steppe. There was no tribe left that could rival him. At this point, everyone thought he had completed the great enterprise of unifying the steppe and only lacked a resounding title. Someone suggested he call himself Gur Khan, meaning Khan of the Center, but Temujin believed that although the title was vivid, it still lacked sufficient grandeur. He ultimately decided to adopt the name Genghis Khan, symbolizing possession of the four seas under heaven, foreshadowing that he would not only rule the steppe but also conquer a far broader world. The spark for the Mongols' first Western campaign was the rash Khwarezmian dynasty. Although it may sound like an insignificant player, this dynasty was, at the time, of pivotal importance. Khwarezm was praised as the son of the Oases, holding the lands of Transoxiana, most of present-day Afghanistan, and all of Persia, a rising star of the near future. As a rising star, the prudent course is usually not to provoke the hegemon of the day, yet Khwarezm clearly did not grasp this truth. After swallowing the Karakitai, the Mongols had already become a superpower of East Asia. Genghis Khan wanted to take a more civil path, so he sent a caravan to Khwarezm, hoping to establish friendly relations through trade. To avoid conflict, Genghis Khan even personally wrote a letter to the ruler of Khwarezm, expressing with humility that he was willing to treat them as he would his own son. The Khwarezmian king, however, did not take this letter to heart, nor did he take the Mongol threat seriously. This contempt led to disaster. A Khwarezmian provincial commander not only attacked the Mongol caravan but also plundered its goods. Seeing this, Genghis Khan realized that civilized measures were unworkable. He decided to take the most extreme course. If he could not obtain it, he would destroy it. Thus, in 1219, Genghis Khan personally led 100,000 Mongol cavalry to launch the Mongol Empire's first Western expedition, which also opened the curtain on a century-long nightmare for Europe. Had the European states of the time known the dreadful consequences of this chain reaction, they would likely have torn Khwarezm to pieces without hesitation. Genghis Khan's military tactics were highly sophisticated. He did not directly assault Khwarezm's walled cities, for those cities usually had high, sturdy walls that were extremely difficult for cavalry to take. Instead, he chose first to raid the surrounding villages, but without killing, driving the villagers into the cities to sow panic. He conveyed a message to the towns: "Do not resist, and you will not be killed. Pay protection fees on time, and all will be well." If there was resistance, then extermination would follow from start to finish. This was no empty threat. Genghis Khan's city extermination policy was thorough. Cities that resisted were almost all annihilated, with only a few skilled people, such as craftsmen and physicians, kept for Mongol use. In the tales that spread, after taking a resisting city, Mongol cavalry could slaughter 1 million people within a week, and the entire city would instantly become a dead place. Under such an atmosphere of extreme terror, many Khwarezmian cities did not dare resist and surrendered one after another. Genghis Khan was ruthless to his enemies, yet he was equally unrestrained toward those who surrendered. After taking a city, he allowed his soldiers to plunder at will, even encouraging them to enjoy the spoils. Genghis Khan once left a famous line: The greatest pleasure in life is to cut into the enemy ranks, seize their wealth, mount their horses, and enjoy their wives and concubines. Such bold words greatly stirred the morale of Mongol warriors. After all, these lonely men on horseback, who had traveled thousands of li, most needed precisely this kind of spur. Summed up, Genghis Khan's tactics were to create an atmosphere of terror first, exterminate resisting cities to leave no hidden dangers, while also emphasizing the absorption of technical talent, and to pair this with strong incentive policies. Thus it can be seen that Mongol cavalry were not only unmatched in force, their governance acumen also inspired awe. However, Genghis Khan soon realized he had greatly overestimated Khwarezm's strength. In fact, to deploy the Mongol army against Khwarezm was like using an ox knife to kill a chicken. Yet, since these 100,000 elite troops had already reached the battlefield, returning empty-handed would be far too wasteful. Genghis Khan therefore decided to expand operations further. He ordered two great generals, Subutai and Jebe, to lead 20,000 cavalry to continue raiding the surrounding lands, setting a 3-year pact, strike wherever was rich, and return to Mongolia on time when the 3 years were up. The Mongol host pushed from Samarkand all the way to Azerbaijan, then crossed the Caucasus. In the Caucasus, the Mongols first smashed the Alans and the Cumans. Under the pressure of Mongol iron cavalry, the Cumans were in utter disarray and fled weeping to Rus for aid, appealing to their overlord, the Grand Prince of Kiev. The Grand Prince of Kiev, unwilling to show weakness, led 80,000 Rus's coalition troops and fought the Mongols in a decisive battle on the Kalka River. This battle gave the Mongols a perfect opportunity to display their superb tactics. Mongol cavalry excelled at guerrilla warfare and long-range strikes. They first attacked the Rus's coalition from a distance with arrows, then feigned retreat, and during the withdrawal they continued shooting, using this tactic to enrage the foe. Once the enemy pursued, the Mongol cavalry would maneuver like flying kites, constantly pulling and tugging, step by step luring the enemy into the trap that had long been prepared. At this point, their most classic tactic was displayed to the fullest. After enticing the enemy into the encirclement, the Mongol horsemen's first move was actually to change horses, switching to freshly rested mounts. Then the Mongol army launched a full-speed charge, completely smashing the enemy formation. After that, they split and encircled, cutting the enemy into isolated fragments, and continued to employ the tactic of shooting while riding, attacking without pause from every direction, surrounding and pursuing, cutting down their foes. This tactic was called the dogfight method by the Mongols, vividly describing their flexible, swift, and precise style of attack on the battlefield. Europeans, meanwhile, referred to this Mongol horse archery skill of shooting while running as the Parthian shot. This ancient technique allowed the Mongols to sweep across Eastern Europe like the wind. The outcome of the Battle of the Kalka River left the Rus utterly shattered. 9 Grand Princes were killed in the battle, and out of the 80,000 men of the Russian coalition, almost none survived. Fewer than 1 in 10 soldiers escaped. In just a few months, the entire Russian region was left devastated and broken by the Mongols. Faced with such a catastrophic blow, the Rus began to believe that all of this calamity was divine punishment for angering God, who had sent them such terrifying enemies. Thus the Mongols were given the title, the Scourge of God. After their victory at the Kalka River, the Mongol army continued advancing west, ravaging along what is today Ukraine, all the way to the Crimean Peninsula. Watching the Mongol forces sweeping across Eastern Europe with unstoppable momentum, it seemed only a matter of time before they would capture Kiev. However, by then Genghis Khan's 3-year pact had already expired, and Jebe and Subutai had to obey the order to withdraw eastward. On their way back, they did not forget to educate the Volga Bulgars along the banks of the Volga River, ending this epic first Western campaign in a storm of devastation. The first Mongol Western expedition not only shocked all of Central Asia and Eastern Europe, but also laid the groundwork for future Mongol conquests. For the Europeans who had encountered the Mongol Iron Cavalry, this was without a doubt a lasting nightmare.